Best. All right. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Everybody hear me all right? I'm going to go ahead and stand up so everybody can see me. Hi. For those of you that I've not had the pleasure of meeting yet, I'm Thomas O'Brien. I'm the chairman of the Planning Commission. And my understanding is that though this is a joint meeting, we're still having it on the night of the Planning Commission meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off this joint City Council, Planning Commission, and Development Authority meeting by calling us to order. And has everybody had a chance to take a look at the agenda? Everybody have an agenda in front of them that wants one at this point? All right, good deal. Well, at this point, I'm not sure if we have any public to seek public comment, but we'll go ahead and open the floor for public comment. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and proceed to new business. So take it away.
All right. Thank you all. I'm Richard McLeod. I'm the Community Development Director. I think I know everyone here. I'm doing this in conjunction with Michael Starling.
Sure. Hey, I'm Michael Starling, the Economic Development Director. Good to see everybody. I'll be presenting in a minute. Do you want to have everyone introduce themselves first, or?
Eric, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'll stand up here. Okay. Eric Linton, City Manager, and I've met with most of y'all at some point in time. But one person I do want to be sure we introduce, because he hasn't been in front of y'all, is Ken Bernard. Ken, stand up. Ken is our city attorney. Yeah, I know. Ken, why don't you give him just a brief about you?
Very brief. I'm Ken Bernard. I'm the city attorney, and it's good to meet everybody. And I'm bad with names. I'm Cajun. I can't help it. Too much hot sauce over the years, but I'm glad to be here and glad to be helping out the city in any way I can.
Also, I want to introduce Paul Leonhardt, Madeline Smith, and Allegra Dedor. Allegra, when you all start discussing, she will have the mic and she will run around between you all to hand the mic. So would you all like to introduce yourselves? All right, I'm just going to hand it.
Okay. I'm Debbie Gordon with the Planning Commission.
Rob Price with the City Council.
Jonathan Sangster, Dunwoody Development Authority.
Susan Mitchell, I want to sing, Development Authority. Terry Julian Polk, Development Authority.
Cheryl Strickland, Development Authority. Lynn Deutsch, Mayor.
Joe Seconder, City Council.
John Hennigan, City Council.
Mike Herman, Development Authority.
Catherine Lautenbacher, City Council.
Jeff Ackerman, Development Authority.
Stacey Harris, City Council.
Bill McCann, Development Authority.
Deb Cameron, Planning Commission.
Elizabeth Shin, Planning Commission.
Jackie Edmondson, Planning Commission.
Scott Brown, Planning Commission.
Erica Harris, Planning Commission.
Thomas O'Brien, Planning Commission.
We need to mix you guys up a little bit better.
I was told this was a rough crowd, so I'm the Deputy Chief of Police, Mike Carlson.
Thank you. This is the result of, we had a retreat back in March. City Council wanted to get us all together, you all to get together and talk about planning, what we're going to do, what we've done. So we have a couple presentations, and then I think at the end, we're going to turn it back over to you all and let you all discuss. So I think Johan is first. So.
Oh, I'll just do it safely from back here. I'm Johan Weber. I work for the Perimeter Community Improvement District. Specifically, I manage the Perimeter Connects program. I've had the pleasure and honor of speaking in front of council at least once before. But I'm excited. I get to share a little bit of data with everybody today. So let me. Oh, okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to dive right in. This spring, we had the opportunity to conduct the first Perimeter District Survey. The CID and Perimeter Connects, the program within it, have over previous years, for many years, gone through a process of data collection in partnership with specific sites and partners in the perimeter area. So historically, we would do surveying of a workforce at a specific employer partner. It might be, State Farm or Cox. We would do a site-wide survey of a large commercial property that we were a partner with. So, your Terraces or your Ravinia. And that gave us really valuable data in understanding commute patterns and drove a lot of the programming and work that we did with those partners over the years. But those were very focused efforts. They were sort of specific to a particular site and a particular point in time, and they were not necessarily representative of the larger district. For quite a while, we had wanted to expand that to a district-wide effort. And obviously, we're kind of waylaid from our original plans to do that in 2020. Things kind of worked together to be able to finally do our first district-wide survey in 2023. So this was conducted in March, April, and May, distributed across the different sites where we conducted outreach. And I will walk you through the core data and results from that survey. And I want to emphasize our original hope and aspiration here was to gather data that would give us some snapshot and understanding of particularly workforce. Workforce is our core audience. Historically, those who our programs and initiatives aim to serve. But I will say it was not intended to be exclusive to that audience. We did also undertake some efforts to try to collect data from residents. We did a direct mailer to every, 10,000 residential addresses within the CID boundary. That, as you can see here, did not perform super well. It's one of those things we're sort of trying out in how we reach different audiences and expand kind of our understanding. We'll be keen to see how we can iterate on that in the future. But we did get a very large participation amongst the workforce within the district. So we will talk about that data, about this survey data as specifically representative of the workforce within the district. And I'll talk about this more in a moment. The sample size, our final tally is more than enough for us to feel that this is a statistically meaningful sample. So we can feel pretty confident about the data, but again, to the audiences that we had a large enough response rate for. So that is going to be basically office workers. I'll talk more about that though in just a moment. Age-wise, we had a nice split in our workforce. So this is very interesting. Largely seems to mirror other data that we've seen, but our workforce for perimeter is relatively balanced between these sorts of core decades. The 25 to 34, 35 to 44, and 45 to 54 represent almost relatively equal portions, as well as a large contingent in the 55 to 64. So we have our workforce is very diverse in terms of the generations and ages that comprise it. This is not necessarily surprising to us. But this is a good sort of confirmation and again, gives us some confidence in the overall data. But I mentioned this is representative of office workers, and that is not through a lack of effort to engage the other industries that are so common in the area. We obviously have a very large retail, restaurant, and hospitality sector and workforce in the district. But as we've experienced time and again in the many years of us trying to engage that workforce, is very difficult to be able to engage them and for them to be able to participate in things, even when that thing is as simple as a survey card that they can take home and complete later and comes with a pretty sizable potential incentive. So when we come back around on this in a year and a half, we'll be trying to redouble our efforts to reach that workforce. But the office workers, again, representative of many of the large employers that you all would expect and be familiar with. The notable one on that list is kudos to City of Dunwoody for a larger than sort of punched above your weight on response rate. I hear there are a few staff that really wrangled, but We won't wade into that. We'll just focus on the perimeter district overall. So let's talk about commute modes, how folks report that they get to work. They are given this prompt across all 7 days of the week, so we can look at how these things compare throughout the week. The most interesting, though also not surprising thing, is that we do have the expected kind of hybrid work pattern. We have a much lower rate of in-office work on Mondays and Fridays than we do on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Wednesday is our most common in-office day, very closely above Tuesday. That seems to vary very slightly across other business districts across the country, but for us, I guess we're just a Wednesday, kind of workplace. We do notably have much lower rates of remote work Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday than we have heard from some of our peer districts, but higher rates of remote work Monday and Friday. We have more, this sort of effect of being in the office the middle of the week is a little more pronounced for us than some of the other districts in Metro Atlanta are reporting or seeing in their survey data. The other important pieces here are train ridership. That's the green to kind of help it stand out a little bit. That's about 43% of the train ridership that we had for that pre-COVID kind of aggregated data. Obviously, if you're coming in 2-3 days a week, we would expect, that we would have maybe 60% of transit ridership if it was just due to remote work. So in other words, we've taken a bigger hit on transit ridership than just accounting for being remote. The same is true for bus and carpool, which are both about 50% of the rates that they were at before. So for our program, which is obviously concerned with trying to assist mobility and access and getting folks to and from work and around the district, that's a really meaningful note for us and our work moving forwards. However, I also want to emphasize there is this, fascinating tension between wanting folks to be in the office, obviously for, a commercial district and an economic center, but at the same time, comparing this to our drive alone rate pre-COVID, which was about 78%, we are seeing, effectively tens of thousands of fewer vehicles being driven alone in the district. So there is a tension certainly for our program and our work. This is just breaking it out for office workers. Again, they comprise so much of the original data that it's not substantially different from what you've seen in the overall data, but we like to kind of package it together. Looking at folks' trips to work, I shouldn't say just drives, all commutes, we ask them to self-report how much time it takes them. They reported an average of 40 minutes trip into work in the morning. We had nearly a quarter that reported an hour or longer commute trip in the morning. However, the afternoon, not surprisingly, is noticeably worse, where we have over a third that report an hour or longer commute trip home. That's generally, we kind of consider that based off of research out there to be kind of, those are retention risk folks. So nearly a third of the workforce is in that situation where they have what we consider to be a long commute. The average there is 47 minutes. You can see the overall distribution of that a little bit further. I'm sure that this will be shared with everybody if you want to look in it, break out the 10-minute blocks in detail, but I'll give you a sense, just comparing this to our aggregated data from pre-COVID, our average commute length is 1 mile longer than it was pre-COVID. That's not a very meaningful difference, given, again, our sample size, it's technically statistically meaningful, but it's effectively the same. However, our average travel times are a little bit different. They are, you can see here, 42 and 50 in the pre-COVID versus that 40 and 47 before. So commutes are actually just a little bit shorter now in time than they were before, despite being technically 1 mile longer, which is not a huge difference in either direction, but I think reflective of the kind of pattern we've seen in reduced congestion regionally. Just to give you a sense, very briefly, I know this is kind of small, but our distribution of workforce, unsurprisingly, for a place with well over 100,000 jobs, we pull from across the region. You can see kind of the core patterns. We've done a bit of a heat map on the right, so you can see the core clustering. Interestingly, what this reflects is just that the area of the single largest density of home location is actually quite close. It only represents, single-digit percentages of the overall workforce, but again, it is the single largest node of that kind of density. Probably not that surprising considering. But otherwise, we see, the sort of clustering in the larger areas around Dunwoody and Sandy Springs, Brookhaven is a very common one. And then you have that kind of big in-town cluster, Midtown and areas adjacent. So we have, again, quite a spread, but some interesting patterns in where folks reside. This is not does not appear to have changed massively from our pre-COVID data, but we're doing a little bit more geographic analysis to assess. Looking at when folks come into work, we have kind of the same bell curve that we had before. It has changed very slightly, but it has not been a transformation in schedules in the way that I think it may have felt like it could have been. We know that flexible scheduling is still a relatively common practice theoretically, but we are nonetheless seeing a lot of consistency in folks still choosing to arrive at 8, 8:30, or 9 o'clock for work. A bit of that kind of tail from 7, 7:30, and 9:30, but the sort of rough pattern is still the same. That's also true for the afternoon, though there's a little bit more of a distribution here. We see more of that flexible effect coming into play with folks leaving at 3 or 3:30 than we do for the relative one in the morning. That makes some sense with congestion being worse in afternoons. There's more incentive to leave at 3 than arrive at 7. But you can see we still have this kind of roughly, 4 to 6 o'clock are, active, very active departure times. So let's shift gears. One of the things that was really, really helpful for our team, for the CID, and we're really interested to share with you all, is that we, with this survey, expanded beyond just looking at commuting. We wanted to understand and use this opportunity to gather some feedback and perceptions. What do folks think about the perimeter district overall? What are their takes on its accessibility, its various attributes? We also asked some questions about their kind of core activities and their perceptions about the buildings where they work. So I'll start with their activities. They were given each of these as prompts and asked, how frequently do you do each of the following at a business in the perimeter district? Eat lunch is our most common activity. You can see that it's actually quite common to go out to lunch at least once a week in the perimeter district. That was 56% of folks. So that's not really that surprising, but I think it affirms that this is a relatively commonplace activity. We only had 3% who reported that they never go out to lunch at a business in the perimeter district. Never seems very strong to respond to that. But I'm sure there are folks who really, really stick to their guns and never going out to lunch. Takeout was also quite common. I really wish we had data from this from like 5 years ago, but we'll see how this tracks moving forwards. Eating dinner was a little more common than I think we expected. Particularly, you can see there's, a third of the workforce basically reported that they did that monthly. Add to that the folks who do that more than that, and you have a sizable portion that actually do go out to dinner in the district. Groceries was also a little more common than we expected. And then, of course, a very, very large proportion on that kind of monthly or rarely for things like buy clothing. However, the area that we maybe are disappointed in going out after work with colleagues was a much lower percentage than perhaps we'd like to see, or than certainly many of our restaurateurs would like. This one, it's been a minute since I have done full screen on PDF. And I have a couple printed copies too. I can share with some folks. This is, I'll try to read through this to make this legible in proxy for the visual. How much do you agree or disagree with the following statements? The kind of bright gold on the far left is strongly agree. The lighter gold is agree. And you can kind of visually break out the kind of neutral with the blue. We've organized this in terms of the most agreed with statements. So the ones that are most agreed with, perimeter is a nice place to live. This was asked of folks who reported that they lived within the district. Again, this was 300 and some folks, mostly folks who also worked here. But nonetheless, you'll probably be happy to know that was 89% agreed with. I don't think we took that as particularly surprising. Perimeter is a nice place to work. Here we had 87% agreement with that statement, nearly a third that strongly agreed with that statement. So this is a very positive affirmation in terms of perceptions about the district. Perimeter has appealing shopping destinations. This was 77% agreed with. Both of those statements, nice place to work and appealing shopping destinations, have very, very low rates of disagreement as well. And then perimeter is a safe area. Here we had 76% agreement. And again, we only had 6% disagree at all with that statement, only 1% strongly disagree. So those are the areas we kind of identify as like the core strengths of the district in the eyes of the workforce. Nice place to live, nice place to work, appealing shopping destinations, safe area. Now we make our way down. It's easy to get to the perimeter district. We had 48% agree or strongly agree with that statement, and 33% disagree or strongly disagree with that statement. We kind of look at this as the tale of two commutes. So we saw from the data that there are a sizable portion of folks with long commutes. We are in the process of kind of comparing these two data points to each other, but our hypothesis is that those things will kind of dovetail with each other and correlate, that if you have a longer commute, your perception of this is more negative. Nonetheless, that does represent, a third of the workforce that strongly disagrees that it's easy to get here. It's easy to get around the perimeter district is also another one where we do not perform as well. We actually had 35% disagreement with that statement and 43% agreement. So we know that, and we've just finished breaking this out by kind of zones of the district. We do see that it does differ where you are in the district, how much you agree or disagree with that statement. But nonetheless, this is an area where overall we feel like we could be performing better. It's easy to walk around the perimeter district as another area we do actually a little bit worse, with only 34% agreeing with that statement. Again, that does vary by zone, but it is one of those where we way underperform some of our peers. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Perimeter has enjoyable recreational options. 49% neither agreed nor disagreed with that statement. That is my favorite stat in this entire presentation. We like to think that folks aren't entirely sure what recreational options there are. So certainly that is a strong one. I also like that one because it tells me that they were not asleep at the wheel when they took the survey. Perimeter is an affordable place to live. Again, this was asked to folks who said that they lived here, and a very high rate of disagreement. This was the most disagreed with statement. Again, just of folks who live here. So let's talk about buildings. How much do you agree or disagree with the following statements about the building you work in? So again, ranked in order of agreement, the building is an attractive place to work. 87% agreed with that statement. We are breaking this out for the buildings that we've worked with, so they get feedback on how they kind of performed relative to that average. It is, of course, not the same for every site, but overall, we're not, our number one sort of issue here, or lowest performing area, is not that the buildings are unattractive, though there are 4% who disagreed with that statement. The food options nearby are appealing. This one we also do relatively well, at about 75%. So that's affirming for the kind of restaurant options in the market. I'm satisfied that my job is located here. This is an important one as we think about the work that we do with our partners. So 69% agreed with that statement or strongly agreed with that statement. 13% disagreed with that statement. So generally affirming about kind of folks and their feelings about working in the district, but some room for improvement perhaps. Building has the amenities that I want. It's 67% agreement with that statement and 16% disagreement. Again, we see some variation by building there. Food options nearby are affordable, performed worse than food options nearby are appealing. So we had 64% that feel that food options nearby are affordable and 15% that disagreed. It's easy to get to the building from my home. Again, we see a bit of that kind of split effect. 31% disagree. And then we have, 50-some% that agreed with that statement. And then the one with the kind of least agreement overall, as well as a very large contingent, a third that neither agreed nor disagreed. It's easy to get from MARTA rail station to the building. Again, we do see variation on this one by building, though it is not as simple as the ones that do or do not have shuttles, which is a very interesting data point for us as we move forward. We also, everybody likes word clouds. I know they're like kind of old fashioned at this point, but they're still a nice little visualization. What 3 words would you use to describe perimeter? Busy, traffic, congest, which is just, we're picking up both congestion and congested with that. But we also have nice, clean, convenient, work, fun actually made it in there. So that's great. Construction. Then we also asked, what types of businesses would you like to see added to the district or nearby? Despite the very high ratings on restaurant, that was the most common one. One thing that was interesting, I have a little more detailed analysis that I'll pass along to Michael and others to share because we just literally finished it today. We have some more of the adjectives that were associated in front of restaurant. So there obviously were a lot of modifiers. That's the most common word, but there are lots of different modifiers put in front of it. I know a few of them were sort of things like boutique, non-chain, but again, I'll share that list. But I wanted to show and share how we stack up to other markets in the region really briefly. So we do outperform similar data from Midtown, and we don't have quite apples to apples with Buckhead. I want to be very clear about that, with the exception of Safe Area, where their question was framed basically the same way, but their others were worded differently. Safe Area, we outperformed Midtown and Buckhead. Similarly, appealing shopping over Midtown. Great Place to Work, however, we underperformed very slightly to Midtown, which is curious, of course, given the others. But I think it says a lot about the other assets and attributes of Midtown. Easy to get around and walkable, we well underperform Midtown. So certainly you could look at this and think those are factors in people's assessments of how great a place is to work. Again, we're doing very well. 87% is something that we're very, very happy with. But, it's nice to look at and imagine that 90%, 95%. And walkability is the area that we are furthest behind. So I won't go through the resident data because, again, we don't feel like it's statistically representative, but we just wanted to showcase, that we saw a distribution in how long folks had lived in perimeter from among those who took the survey, which was interesting for us. We had a third of folks who said that they had lived within the district for over 10 years. Mm-hmm. We included a visual of it, but frankly, there's always a sort of, how folks select and opt to these. There's a margin of error in that. So yeah. And then we'd asked why they chose to live in perimeter. Close to work was the most common. Again, that makes sense because there's so much overlap between these folks and working here. So we've captured a lot of the folks who obviously chose to live here because it was close to work. Close to stores and restaurants and safe place to live were the next most common. And then the other home locations they had considered were Brookhaven, Roswell, Alpharetta, Buckhead, Chamblee, Doraville. So really quickly wrapping this up, we had lots of great open-ended feedback on things. Of course, construction came up a lot. Lots of comments about sidewalks, pedestrian upgrades, walkability. But I just wanted to share really briefly, perimeter is well perceived broadly. This was very affirming, very encouraging as we think about the district and its needs moving forwards. People generally like working here. Though, again, it's not considered very walkable. It's not considered very easy to get around. I think that last part is interesting to us in part because we think of this as an easy place to drive around. That was not enough to score well in people's ratings of how easy it is to get around. So that's sort of curious for us, and the alignment between that and walkability is certainly something for reflection. Perimeter lacks recreational and entertainment options. That was a takeaway. Folks wanted more diverse restaurant choices, easier experiences getting around. And then, of course, as we talked about, if remote work did decline, particularly filled in kind of the other gaps, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we would expect that traffic on local roads would noticeably worsen. We would experience a little more congestion. So that's it for me. Happy to field any questions. Again, we are in the midst of kind of more data analysis and dive on this. So if you want to ask much more detailed questions, totally reach out to me. I'm happy to dive into it further in the future. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Johan. So to follow up on that information, I've got a quick sort of, I guess I need to, quick overview of sort of where the economy stands, our economic sort of existing conditions. And then I've got a very brief overview of the Edge City 2.0 study that we did last year that gives us sort of a 20-year vision. I think these two presentations sort of match up pretty well because I think a lot of what the survey told us is also some of what we're going to see in this data And I think moving forward, I think we merge these two, and I think we've got a good vision of where we need to go as in development, at least in the community. So there's a lot of talk about post-COVID, what's happening to the office market. And so the basic question really comes down is how do we continue to thrive as a community? How do we support our commercial market? At least that's what I'm concerned with and Development Authority is concerned with, is how do we continue to support the commercial market? I think you're going to see through some of this data, the real question is, what do we do about office occupancy? Because that is our one sort of weakness. That's our Achilles heel right now. We're not alone. Everybody's dealing with it. We're in better shape than some, but that's sort of the key question. Existing conditions, I wanted to go back a little bit. Since incorporation, we've had over $800 million of investment in Dunwoody. State Farm, Hub, 1224. We've had 4 new hotels, a lot of new restaurants and investment. So we've done pretty well the past 15 years. And right now we're doing quite well. We have over 600 million of commercial construction going on. That includes Perimeter Marketplace. Ashford Lane is finishing up their renovation and really repositioning of that shopping center. And of course, the 2 big ones, High Street and Campus 244. Since I've been here in Dunwoody 13 years, High Street was one of those things you get the question, it's next year. Well, it is next year. It is going to get done, at least phase 1. And it's interesting, if you see all 4 of these new developments, there's a common theme in them. They're all built around a green space. They have commercial, food and beverage, restaurants, retail around an active place. And I think that's one thing moving forward we're going to see a lot more of. Sorry, you can't really see this, but this is sort of office, retail, and hotels. Right now we have just under 10 million square feet of office space. That's a huge amount of office space for a city of 52,000 people. 21% of that space is vacant. Not too bad compared to other places, although that doesn't tell the whole story. We actually have closer to 29% availability of office. So we've got a lot of office that has leases on it, but no one is occupying that space. These numbers are for the entire city. So Perimeter is actually a little worse. We're closer to 35% availability. So a lot of that is State Farm space that they're still leasing, but they moved into their new corporate hub. We've had a number of companies who lease space before COVID or going into COVID, and they actually never occupied that space. They're leasing it. It's there. It's got furniture, but they've never occupied the space. So office is certainly a challenge. On the other hand, retail is not. Our retail market is doing very well, and it really always has. We've got under 3% vacancy. And if you look at the availability, it's just over 3.2. So basically we're full in our retail. There are some retail that we can all point out that some of it's been vacant for a long time. But basically our retail market is on fire, and we've got a lot more of it coming. So hotels, 2,100 hotels. We've had about 600 hotel rooms built since incorporation, and we've got another 145 under construction. Of course, during COVID, hotels basically went to zero, but they have come back in a big way, not just for us, but for all markets. This looks at occupancy in 2023 and 2022. Right now it's at 66%, which is very strong, and that's year to date in 23. The entire year of 2022 is right at 58%. And the RevPAR, which is revenue per available room, which is the number one goal of all hotels, is to pump up RevPAR. It's $98 right now, and it was $76 last year. If you go back to 2019, so pre-COVID, we were at 55% occupancy. Average daily rate was 160, and then RevPAR was just under 89. So our hotels are doing very well. That's also part of the story about our retail, why it's doing so well. Occupancy is back. People are here. when you have high occupancy, you have a lot more people in the market and they're spending money, they're shopping. Right before COVID, the CVB did a study and they found that average hotel stay, they spent about $120 on restaurants and shopping every day. Yes. We can get that. I don't have it with me, but yeah, we get a quarterly report from the CVB that tracks us. Right now, we are 1 or 2 in every one of these. RevPAR for Buckhead is always higher because their rates are higher. But we're doing very well, and our increase has been number 1 this year out of all the markets in Atlanta. But I can get those numbers, look at Buckhead and yeah, I think we probably would be, and I could put a report together to actually look at both of those, the office occupancy in Buckhead and the hotels to see where we are. Yep. So Perimeter Mall, this is probably the biggest question we get is what's happening to Perimeter Mall. Obviously, if Brookfield built this today, it would look nothing like this. Peak mall in the US happened in mid-90s. And ever since that time, sales in malls have gone down and malls have closed. The good news is not all malls are created equal, and our mall is doing extremely well, actually thriving. They tell us they're doing better now in sales than they were prior to COVID. I think some of that is people are not shopping in other places and they are coming to Perimeter. But I think we all understand, though, that moving forward, things at the mall are going to change, and they're going to change pretty drastically. The good news is Brookfield, the owner of the mall, is a mixed-use developer. They build not just malls, but hotels, office space, and residential. So they understand how to take a 70 or 80 acre property and redevelop it. And actually, that's already started to happen. We all know the smaller restaurants have been built in the parking lot around it. 1224 was a parking lot at one time. A developer came in and redeveloped it. So over time, that's the kind of redevelopment we're going to see at the mall. The good news is we're coming from a place of strength right now. We're not having to backfill a department store or something like that. So good news from the mall. Recruitment, obviously, during COVID, recruitment stopped. We had a lot of momentum right before COVID with new office recruitment. Although a year and a half into COVID, it picked up again. Hapag-Lloyd recently occupied their space at Ravinia 3. Transportation Insight and Insight Global had leases at Campus 244. So we're starting to get some movement, not big leases, but movement. And we're starting to talk to people about buying buildings, smaller buildings, and they want to buy them at much reduced valuations than they are now, but at least people are coming in and looking at valuations. So we are seeing an uptick in office recruitment. So Ed City, well before COVID, I think we all understood that we lacked a clear vision of what we wanted Perimeter to be, from elected officials, from citizens, and the development community. So we went to the Atlanta Regional Commission and got a grant from them to do a year-long study of what the Perimeter District should be in the future. What should the next 20 years look like? So this discussion is, again, specifically on Perimeter, not the rest of Dunwoody. They did a competitive review first thing and found that we were at either number 1 or 2 or 3 in almost every category they looked at. So we are highest in education and daytime population of any of these 10 areas. And that goes from Buckhead all the way up to Alpharetta and Cumberland. So we've got good metrics. Second highest median home value and per capita consumer spending, both of those behind Buckhead. And then third highest average household income and number of residential units. So if you look at Perimeter, one of the reasons why our retail is doing so well is because we have the basic metrics. We have people with disposable income. We've got a lot of people here. I know there's a lot of conversation about residential, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. You know, more apartments, more rental, but we already have a lot of that here. We have 6,200 existing residential units in Dunwoody's portion of Perimeter Center right now. And obviously we've got new development on its way. What the public told us they wanted to see out of Perimeter was quite interesting. It's a bit of a mix, but really people want a neighborhood. They want a walkable community of not just a corporate office district. You know, they want a destination. They want something with a more sense of community, variety of restaurants. They really want something unique to Dunwoody and a destination, not just an office market. So one of the issues, the biggest issue in Edge City was really deciding what kind of development are we going to see in the future. And so we looked at sort of and we wanted it to be market feasible, right? We didn't want to say we want to be something that the market wouldn't support. So this is what they think, the experts think the market, if we had no rules about development, what the market would provide in all the commercial categories. So multifamily is all residential. It's just not apartments. It's just residential. Conservative scenario was 6,000, aggressive was up to 9,300. Office, they think 1 million to 2.5 million square feet, and that's over 20 years. Remember, this is a 20-year time frame. Retail low of 400, high of almost 1 million, and then new hotel rooms 300 up to 715. So we talked a lot about where we needed to land, and we sort of chose mostly in that moderate to moderate aggressive in each one of these. I don't think it's as important to sort of pick and choose, hey, we want to add 9,000 units. I think it was the understanding is we're going to have to add some of all of these if we want the community, if we want a successful community in the future. We can't just say, we're just going to build more office and that's it. And that's all we're going to be. Now, this was after COVID, but the office market, you know, the idea that we're gonna add another 2.5 million square feet of office over the next 20 years, that might be stretching a little bit. But what the consultant said is if you want to do that, that means you need to bend the curve, right? You need to make this a place where office workers absolutely want to be. So it sort of goes back to what Johan was talking about. What is it that workers want? It sounds like they want a walkable place. They want a place with restaurants close by. They want to be able to live close by. So if we want more office, we're going to have to sort of shift and change what this market looks like. So not surprising, the study calls for densification around the MARTA station. That's where the market wants new development to be. And that's where we as a community want it to be as well. Development would then sort of, the intensity would go down as it gets closer to the residential market. More connections. We need more of a street grid. We need more walkability. We need more bike and ped facilities. So creating that network is a priority if we want the perimeter market to succeed. And then open space, green space, not just parks like we built at Two Bridges, but those active privately owned public spaces that sort of act as green space, but it's really built around a commercial restaurants. What we saw at Campus 244 and High Street. And they had 4 big recommendations for the community. First, this needs to be a uniquely Dunwoody regional destination. It can't be thought of as just sort of our small downtown. It has to be a regional destination, and we have to invest in creating a sense of place. We need to continue to promote economic growth. Jobs are important. Oftentimes the Development Authority, we talk about projects. It's not always about the jobs, but we have 10 million square feet of office space. We need to fill that up, or it's going to drag the rest of the market down, or that office space is going to become something else. The Perimeter Mall, again, is probably the most important piece of property in Dunwoody. And so how the mall goes long-term is how the market is going to go as well. And then housing. There's a lot of conversation around housing. A lot of debates around what housing looks like. We think we need more housing, especially in the core around MARTA and at the mall, but it doesn't have to all be rental. There is a absolute opportunity for more for sale product, unique for sale product, in and around perimeter. And some of the areas that are struggling from an office standpoint are the perfect areas where that for sale product could go. So if you look at a map of Dunwoody, what you see in perimeter is asphalt. It's parking lot after parking lot, and those parking lots are sort of future development sites for this residential. I think I was telling John earlier, I was meeting with a CFO of a company that's looking to move here, and he's looking for a house to buy. They live up in the Duluth area right now, and around. He was asked about High Street and specifically around a for sale product. And of course, that's not going to be there in phase one. So we think that's a real market, and so the community really needs to push that and work with developers to make that happen. And so that's the end of my presentation. If you got any questions. All right. Oh, Stacy.
$900.
I think you just keep talking to developer after developer. Some developers specialize in this kind of market, and we've met with them. Richard and I have both met with a few of them. I think you just have to keep at it, and maybe every property owner, that's not their vision and that's not what they want to do, but there are other properties out there. I think one of the things is the community saying, this is our vision and this is what we want. If you agree to that, come talk to us. We also need to be proactive and go after those developments. I think one of it is if we get one, it's going to be much easier to get the next one. You know, we've got a project. It's a senior residential, which also I think is a huge market. Right, the U.S. and Georgia and Atlanta, we're only getting older, all of us, and dealing with sort of housing for seniors is a real question. If you talk to ARC, I mean, they think it's going to be in the next 20 years a real issue about what we do with those 700,000-800,000 over 75-year-olds, new over 75-year-olds. Most of us want to live in the house, but there's a point where you know you eventually have to move out. So there is some options. Yeah. Yeah, there's not, and so that I think is one of the markets, right? It's for the empty nesters, people who don't want to move, and they also want to be around amenities, right? The same amenities that the office workers and people who stay in the hotels want. People who buy a new kind of house, they want to be able to walk places and live a different lifestyle. It's also, I think, for young professionals. If you're paying a couple $1,000s on rent in an apartment, there will hopefully be a time when interest rates come down that you'll be able to afford a smaller, maybe not a single family home, but you can afford a condo or a townhome. I think there was a question.
Just curious.
I would say I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've met with them. We specifically talked about punching those roads through. Obviously, the mall's there, so yes, they're aware of it. They see the benefit of it.
Mm-hmm. Not beyond that they know what they have there and they know it needs to change. And I think we would probably be very on the same page of what that looks like, mixed use, open space, grid, or grid-ish maybe is a better term. It may not be the grid that we want, but it's going to be more of a grid. It's not going to be maybe the streets aren't going to go exactly where we want them, but they're open to it. I mean, the issue is complicated. It's obviously that they would have to get zoning, you got to get financing. They're a big, huge company and they have assets all over the world and they have to sort of prioritize where those are. But I think High Street is a competition, right? And unlike other developments like say Avalon that help put an end to Gwinnett or North Point, this is across the street. So the investments are happening around the mall. And so when High Street opens, are they going to be a competitor to the mall? Absolutely, I think so. But it's not taking that competition 3 miles down the road. It's only across the street. In some ways, I think one of the things we have to do is make sure those are connected, right? How do you get from High Street to the mall? And sometimes that's a real hard conversation because I think developers say they want to do it, but when it comes right down to it, sometimes they don't, right? They see it as a competition, like, okay, we're gonna block this off so people can't go back and forth. So, all right, well, I'll sit down and we'll move on. Thank you.
And following up on what Johan and Michael talked about, where do we go from here? So that's where the planners come in. You know, we just did the path plan. That's a way to build the relationship between High Street and the mall to get that interconnectivity. We're also have done, I'm just gonna go back a few years. We literally, when I was young, about 8 years old, my mom used to work at Perimeter Mall, and we used to drive through the village. The village looks the same, virtually the same as it did when I was 8 years old. So I started talking to people when I got here. They wanted to overhaul the zoning. They wanted to get rid of the Williamsburg. So that's what we did. We ended up with a new village code. It was adopted in November of 2020. Our code is Euclidean or named after Euclid, Ohio. It's very use-based. Industrial goes here, commercial goes here, residential goes here. It's very sporadic. But as times progressed, we're getting more, we want more mixed use. So we have to write the codes to do that. That was a painful code because there were some people who wanted to hold on to yesterday. But most of the people that we talked to said, no, we're happy to move forward. So you want to talk about sign code?
Yeah, then other sort of recent planning actions that we completed, we did new sign code that we adopted in 2021. Signage came to the forefront, of course, in the last week or so, like you all may have heard about it. But that is also part of the sign code. You know, it's all the sort of graphic communication that the businesses use to lure people in, but it applies to residential lots as well. We have a new sign code that is more graphic. It's a bit easier to use as a menu board approach, where business can pick and choose sort of the signage that meets them. And in the interest sort of transitioning towards a more walkable environment, you know, we have signage types in there that, you know, that previously weren't available, sort of blade signs that are more oriented towards pedestrians and sidewalks, as opposed to cars. And then currently in the city council has like taken actual money, like assigned over $1 million to this, is traffic safety. We're working right now on a road safety action plan, citywide road safety action plan. We've hired a dedicated project manager for this, and we've assigned funding, like actual implementation funding, The plan should be, we should have a draft very soon, towards the end of this month. That should position us for, there's a lot of federal funding right now through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act for safety projects, and we hope we position ourselves with this plan. The really sort of cool thing about this is that we have a bit of implementation money assigned with this. Again, City Council has assigned over $1 million for this. We've completed the first quick build project at Vanderlyn Elementary. There was a sort of a cul-de-sac with a missing connection. There's a walkway from a neighborhood towards the school. There were concerns about sort of unsafe conditions when people dropped off and turned around. We've now put a sidewalk in there. We're working on the second project at Dunwoody Elementary School. So things are moving along even quicker than our typical planning projects.
So again, we're moving forward. So next year, we're beginning again, for those who have been here, we're starting the comprehensive plan again. It's every 5 years. This is a 10-year update, which means we start from scratch. It's due to, the deadline is October 31st of 2025. However, we wanted to start a little early because we have 10 years to make up for. And I think we have grown enough from when we were founded. This is our first real comprehensive plan. We have control now. So I would encourage all of you to participate in that. We're trying to get it done by July of 2025, though it's not due to final, because we have to submit it to ARC and DCA to review it. Comes back and forth a couple times. So in addition to that, we're going to begin the process of rewriting our entire code. So this was our code. It's 1,000 pages or something. Just the zoning chapter is almost 400 pages. It's all, probably 70% of it is written in 1960 language. The planning efforts of that time. We have come light years from then. You all need to decide what type of code you want. There's form-based codes, there's smart codes, there's various kinds. So in the coming months, we're gonna talk to the City Council and the Planning Commission and encourage that. So. That's all we have. Does anybody want to jump into the last section, which is how to frame decision-making? Do you want?
For the retreat, because these three bodies make up the primary decision makers for the city as it comes to current and future development, right? The Planning Commission is a review and recommending body to City Council when things come through for most rezonings. The Development Authority is the primary, funding, financial decision maker when a developer comes for assistance. Is that about right? And then council has and they are independent of City Council, except for approving appointments to the board. And then we are the final decision makers, mayor and council. And when we were discussing doing this, we wanted to make sure that everybody was operating, and we have great attendance. We're missing only one council person. Every board has everybody here, which is very impressive. And I should have started with that. I'm very grateful for the time and your talents that you bring to the city on a regular basis. These are pretty intensive, labor intensive, work intensive boards, and we appreciate it. And then and that you're all here tonight is fantastic. So I don't know where I thought Dunwoody would be at the end of my first term as mayor. I certainly had goals and objectives, and the pandemic wasn't one of them. And I don't want to use the words, how about uncertain commercial real estate market was probably not in any of my list of things that could be possible. But what I always knew, and what I would tell people 4.5 years ago when I was running for mayor, that we sometimes worry about the wrong things in Dunwoody. You know, we worry about restaurants and entertainment, which are really important. But from my perspective, any business 4.5 years ago that was relocating to Metro Atlanta and didn't have MARTA as a priority, mass transit as a priority, was just as likely to go to Alpharetta, to the newer development at Avalon, and that we needed to look towards the future and figure out how we were going to be competitive with the Avalon developments that was already here and that was coming. So I knew that already. I think it's even more critical. And so one thing I would ask is applications come before the Planning Commission, and as the Development Authority does your work, is that we look at Perimeter Center as our greatest asset and also our greatest liability. I won't give you a lesson yet on taxes in Dunwoody, but I think about 70% of our revenue, is that right, Eric, comes from commercial districts. We are very lopsided. It is a very unusual tax model that we were fortunate to be able to create as a city when we became a city, but the dynamics are probably going to have to change, but that's not for most of y'all to worry about. It's for us to worry about. But the health of Perimeter Center goes a long way to determining the health of our city and resources. Of the commercial, right. And so it's not even if, when decisions come in front of your boards for future redevelopment, we will provide, guidance. Staff gives you recommendations. We have an Edge City plan that I think council is pretty well comfortable with. From my perspective, and I think I speak for council, when we talk about residential, it's important to note that Dunwoody is somewhere between 50 and 52% rental occupied units. When I say that to my peers from across the state, they are always really surprised. And we have a range, not necessarily in Perimeter Center, but across our city, we do have a range of price points for rental housing in Dunwoody. There is a lot of discussion in my peer group and across the state about what affordable really means for housing. So I won't necessarily tell you that we have an abundance of truly affordable, certainly not truly affordable, high quality housing, but we have a range of monthly rental prices. What we have virtually none of, I feel safe to say, is anything remotely affordable on the purchase side. Not only that, we have very little variety in housing options. And not everybody who wants a single family home wants our traditional 5-4 and a door, or I don't know what the average lot size in Dunwoody, half-acre lot. Not only from an affordability perspective, but from a sustainability perspective, from a lifestyle perspective. And Michael didn't say when he talked about housing that generally speaking, mayors like me and cities like us were offered maybe 3 types of residential properties: apartments, townhomes, and if you have available land, single family homes. What we want is diversity in our housing stock. We want to figure out when there's redevelopment opportunities, how we can get products different than what I just listed, which isn't to say we're not going to have more townhomes. But how we get that different kind of housing stock. So since I've been mayor or since I've been on council, Dunwoody continues, like the average age in Dunwoody continues to drop some. We're much younger by several years than we were when I started in 2008 or whatever, but we still have a high percentage of residents that are over 65. many of whom really are stuck in their homes because they just don't want to leave Dunwoody. It's where they worship, it's where they shop, it's where they get their hair done. I mean, that sounds kind of trivial, but when you're 75 or 80, changing everything. And also because it's not just us. We don't have Sandy Springs has a few more options, but not great. They have to go way away. When one of your neighbors moves to 55 plus community, they are moving to Canton, they're moving to Cumming, they're moving to places that weren't even places when they bought their home in Dunwoody 40 years ago. And so as decisions come, Woodstock, as decisions come to you, one of the things that we want to encourage is that we already have a pretty singulars housing product that's already here. And it's okay to say to developers, this is not what we're looking for. Try again. That's perfectly okay. And we're going to rewrite our code so it's clearer. I think we have Edge City plan. And then the other thing that I would like to touch on for 1 second is that one of the things that makes Dunwoody unique amongst our peers in Metro Atlanta is our strong sense of community and neighborhoods. And I think that there's lots of interesting ideas about single family home neighborhoods that are in the literature much more than they're in practice. And I think that from my perspective, where we're going to get the products we need are in our commercial areas, in redevelopment in the perimeter and some other commercial areas. It's hard to see any solution to our housing needs in an existing single family home neighborhood. That's just my perspective. But, somebody comes in and wants to buy a neighborhood out, which happened in many, many decades ago, but that doesn't seem to be a thing anymore. But just as things come before you, I say to Michael Starling and Richard, but mostly Michael Starling all the time, that if Avalon can have what are now $1 million townhomes facing a Chick-fil-A, not even just the Chick-fil-A, it faces the drive-through line at Chick-fil-A, then there are opportunities in perimeter to give us a variety of housing. The 900 condos that Grubb got approved for maybe was not particularly realistic, but there are definitely products and projects that if we let it be known we're interested in and the market settles down, we'll get. And then with the Development Authority, how we lure, so Cumberland had the best, quarter or something of all the commercial areas. They had the best, somebody in commercial real estate probably knows what I'm talking about. They had a really good quarter. They beat everybody, which is unusual, which is office absorption. They did really well. Right. And so we need the construction to end, which it is ending. I think that has really hurt us. The messaging to the Department of Transportation is to give us a break, which I think is going to happen. We'll finish it, but then, and it's really, they're making progress, but we need to be able to, and I know, did Johan leave? Oh, I know that Perimeter Center PCID is getting ready to launch as it finishes. They have a very professional marketing campaign ready to go to say, we're here, remember, we're here, and we're really easy to get to and everything else. And so I think that as we look at decisions moving forward, we're not the same city we were almost 15 years ago when we became a city, but we are absolutely not the city we were 4 years ago because the COVID and the office situation is and just not only was there COVID in the office situation, we grew a bunch of new offices too. And so though those buildings are full, it has an impact on the other buildings. Yes. No, here.
Had Grubb build what Grubb said they were going to build, we would be on our way to some of that variety of housing. we had a change of horse in the middle of the stream. So I want to make sure everybody understands that the pitch was condos, and then when it came to it, what they wanted to build, what they build is apartments.
And even right now, that's very difficult. I mean, there are not a lot of new, and multifamily. I mean, there's 400,000 or 500,000 new units of rental coming on this year around the country. I mean, there are thoughts that market is going to hit a wall, so to speak. So that could mean that residential, for sale residential, will come back. I don't know about condos, especially large condos. That's another question. You don't have to build 300 condo units. You can build smaller condo units. They don't have to be, you don't have to do a 5/1 condo development but we can't really help with for sale residential at the development authority.
So one of the things that I struggled with that Grub property was their pitch to affordability and also senior housing, and the age restricted housing. And they gave us a nice dog and pony show. The side to that was they were saying that our aging population could sell their single family home for $700,000 and then rent this beautiful apartment, all these amenities for the aging population. So I did some quick math, and in 10 years, based on the rent they were recommending that they said it would be, they would blow through their $700,000 in 10 years. So you put a 55-year-old or a 65-year-old in that, and within 10 years, a decade, they're out of money for housing. So my question is, because I think all these goals are laudable, if they're not, what are other options beyond condos for owner occupied housing in this area? What else can we do? I get a little mixed on the definitions even. Can you purchase apartments? Can we have apartments be owner occupied instead of having to be a larger condo? So that's where I'd like to go, because right now we're mixing two issues. We're mixing affordability and availability. So, and we're in a stuck place. I don't see that changing. I don't see the cost of land changing anytime soon. I don't see the cost to build changing anytime soon. So that leaves us in a weird place. To Lynn's point, we need creative options. So among this group, what are those options that we've seen or that we can start to recommend?
You gave me a great segue. Thank you. I was actually going to ask if there have been any proposals in the past for cluster homes or like the single family cluster homes or townhomes like at the Avalon, where honestly, when I moved from my townhome on Mount Vernon, I wanted another townhome that had a small yard. That's all I was looking for. I now have a 5-bedroom home because I have dogs and they require yards. So in any event, have you seen any of those in the past, or are there places where we could identify to go for those alternatives? Because I think that's maybe some of the appeal that we're missing when we think about those other areas, and we're not that far off if we put them near that section.
Kind of condensed housing. Those houses are close together. But the problem is they made them so big, they're starting at $1 million. So it's affordability is going to be key there.
I would say something about the cost of land. Cost of land is actually coming down. I mean, there are office buildings now that are trading for, 50 cents on the dollar. That's not good for us because that hurts our assessments, and we're going to see assessments in office come down, but it is an opportunity, right? This is what happens when markets shift. Somebody new is going to come in and they're going to pay a lower rate for that either office or that parking lot. And now all of a sudden, some things that didn't work with the previous owner because they were into it for X could possibly happen. So there is a window of opportunity, I think.
I was just gonna share some thoughts, I guess, on kind of the, the quadplex, triplex kind of multi-unit. I don't know that politically it would be in any way feasible, but ideally you don't have single family butted right up next to a commercial district, right? Ideally, that's where you have your commercial district with your apartments and your townhomes, and then the next area over, you've got your quadplexes and duplexes and triplexes, and then a little bit further away, you've got single family homes. So like I said, I don't think it's feasible. I don't think there would be any support for it, but you can design triplexes and quadplexes to look like nice big single family homes. I mean, you can do things architecturally that provide that housing stock, but that look like they fit in with single family neighborhoods. So, maybe on the peripheries of perimeter, we look at, how can we put that in to kind of create that transition away from the really dense apartment over retail to kind of these more walkable, but still really dense living areas. So anyway, just a thought.
Yes, time has gone by quickly. About 20 years ago now, when my mom was relocating here from Ohio, she bought a condo in I'm going to call it a cluster home community, but it was essentially kind of pods of 4 units that were attached, that were 1-story units, that were 2 and 3 bedroom units with it. Everyone had their 2-car garage even attached to it, but it was a pod of 4. And the entire subdivision was, I don't know, with a bunch of them. And it was hilly and amenitized and all that good stuff. And at that point in time, the developer was putting them in. There was an Alpharetta project, there was a Kennesaw project, and there was a Stone Mountain project. And that's what I know. I know that hers sold really fast when she bought it. I know that when she passed, it was on the market one day because there's very little of that specific kind of product available. But I have there's a Stone Mountain one, there's a Kennesaw one, and there's an Alpharetta one. And I've had friends even when my mom was ready to sell, it was like, it's going on market this. I mean, it was just quick because it's an easy way to downsize and still have a little patio. You have a patio or a yard or a sunroom and walking trail spaces and putting green and swimming pool, all that cute stuff. But it gives you a way to live and have great air and neighbors. And it wasn't a senior community, but it had that appeal. So they weren't marketing it expressly that way. And yet it kind of turned itself into one because it had all the right stuff. The price of land, which I'm not going to keep going, but the price of land, I think, is the thing that kind of keeps that from being more prevalent. So if it is coming down, I don't know how far it can come down, but that's one thing that I know a lot of folks find attractive. That's something.
Yeah, I would, I lived over here for 6 years. My wife and I know kids, but I could see, I'll tell you what, if you don't have children, people want to live next to their children and grandchildren. But we don't have any. So I'm asking for a place where people can be outside of your cars. Like imagine a dead end cul-de-sac, but not for cars cul-de-sac, but a green space with the public green. And that's all our front yards face that green. And we can have dinners together, socialize in that space. And we might have a 1-car carport and it's single level. And we live perfectly fine in a 1,200 square foot place for 4 years in Zurich. And I would be perfectly fine with that as long as it was well laid out. That's the kind of product I'd like. I'd like to hear more from Jeff about financing because I want to hear about, I'll also say, I've read online, some of the cities have a set of pre-approved plans where a developer can, the city is already pre-approved. Here's this home inventory. If you want to just build to stock, to script, you could just pull these plans and you can build. So if we had triplexes, duplexes, stacked flats, cluster homes, a set of pre-approved plans, and they could just go, I don't know if that will help for a cost of, but I'd like to hear about financing for owner occupied and why that's a burden, barrier, and how we can overcome that. Sure.
Well, first of all, just the market in general is very difficult and very illiquid for almost anything, for even the most attractive products. And for more difficult to finance projects like condos, it just makes it that much more difficult. I don't know anything about the original Grub proposal per se. It came before Dunwoody, but when it actually first started out, I was still in that market. And I remember that deal was kind of floating around and people had the opportunity to, get involved in it. And there just wasn't a market to finance condos, and that's just to get it built. Then you have the end users who were going to buy a condo, and now they got to go get a residential loan. They're a lot harder to securitize than a single family home. You have rental issues. There are just a lot of issues that make condos difficult to finance. I think you may be able to find, a developer to develop a smaller project, very high quality, possibly, but I don't think you're going to get any kind of real stock. Like, you're not going to get a lot of condos. You may get 150 units. So maybe, or townhomes for that matter. But I think Michael is onto it. Lynn has already mentioned it. There's going to be opportunities in the commercial district that may not seem obvious, but I think will become more obvious.
Well, Jeff, I just kind of to throw out one additional question related to this is, I think we talk about, how difficult it is to finance something. Obviously, real estate is a cyclical business. What's difficult to do today may be less difficult 3 years from now, 2 years from now, or 6 years from now. I'm not saying that condos are ever an easy product. I think a lot of banks and other investor entities got hurt by condos 15, 20 years ago. And I don't know that they've ever really rebounded from that. But I think, my point is just, if you know what you want, it may just be a question of being patient enough for it and just sticking to your guns until maybe the market comes back to you. I don't know that, and it's just a question of, can you be that patient? Because it may take a long time.
Can I say one thing real quick? I don't mean to jump in, but Lynn's mentioned the golden handcuffs of the seniors not having anywhere to live. Some of the most desirable property that we have are the cluster homes, single level cluster homes. A number of us live in it. Joe, I think you live in one. We have aging apartment complexes that are prime for redevelopment. And those apartment complexes are near other cluster homes. There's cluster homes on North Peachtree Road near 285 that are highly desirable, and there's aging apartment complexes in that same area. There's complexes on Winter's Chapel of cluster homes. There's aging apartments right next door. So there's opportunities to find the financing possibly for those types of developments. That's not condo, but it could be single level living to change the demographics of the older housing stock, or the residents who are in those golden handcuffs that want to live local but can't. There might be development opportunities someday to possibly do redevelopment of those older apartment complexes if the market would allow.
I said I would counter it's hard for political will to do density, because it sounds like that's what you want. Sorry. Yeah. Right. But it's like, if we're overhauling the code, we have the Edge City plan, we have the road safety action plan, we have a lot of these things that are in motion right now that are moving towards slower streets, safer walkable areas, density, and mixture of uses, mixture of availability, whether that is housing stock or retail, restaurant, et cetera. And especially with that perimeter center area in mind. I'm not necessarily saying yes, take over neighborhoods in the R100 district, but there's all these moving pieces that this visioning and then being able to support that through decision making, that there's actionable steps that can be taken. Sorry.
It's interesting because I'm listening to this and some of the things, and Johnny brought up a great point. We do have aging apartments. In those aging apartments, we also have very vulnerable communities. And I think that this is a conversation that ultimately the city does need to start to have. When we talk affordable housing, who are we talking affordable housing for? What does affordable housing look like? Which group of workers, are we trying to make sure that there is living opportunities for? Teachers can't live in Dunwoody. So if a teacher can't live in Dunwoody, I guarantee you that a lot of our other workers who work at Target or Walmart or grocery stores, they can't live in Dunwoody either. Georgia is not really on the forefront of providing housing opportunities for people who are who have lower incomes. And so as we talk about these apartments and because one of the things that's running through my head is I'm like, we're built out. We're built out. We do not have the space that Alpharetta, that these outskirt cities have. And so we're having to look within. So absolutely, these apartments that are aging are opportunities. They're also costs. And so that's something that I'm keenly aware of because I'm closely connected to the schools. And I know that there are going to be some direct impacts should we use those. I think that's a discussion we have to have. I don't know if that's appropriate for tonight. But I do think at some point we're going to need to sooner than later discuss what that means and looks like.
Just because that Bob Dallas used to be the head of the planning commission, and I had several conversations with him about affordable housing over the years. And since we're redoing our code, he was a big proponent of what's called inclusionary zoning, where you provide extra density to a developer with the understanding that a portion of that density will be set aside so that a teacher could afford to rent an apartment, or some of your other kind of community workers that you want to have in your community can afford to live in the community. So I'll just throw that out as an idea as we redo our code. Do we want to think about a way to include that for the rental multi-use developments that come in?
20, it was, you felt it's 20% of a development, whether it's single family housing or otherwise, had to be set aside for low income opportunity, there were thresholds.
Yeah.
So if you were saying that, yeah.
So we don't really, maybe some of our commercial, does any of our commercial real estate folks want to opine? They used to keep me really optimistic the first year or two of the pandemic. Do you have anything, anybody? What do you think's going to happen? So what do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen? Right. Right. Right.
guess my takeaways so far, great discussion. Mike made a great point. My first observation is, we've been very we have put up the aspect. One of the things that we have. We look but if there's no financing today, it might be, and that's a different demographic. That might. So, but survey, it might be so I think in a sense you feel that we're kind of on the same page, that good vision for where we go, we need to stay the course. And,
And just to that point, I think about, about the timing, you look at, you know, we're on the cusp of having High Street delivered. I think people may suddenly find Dunwoody a more interesting place because of High Street. I find Dunwoody a more interesting place in the last 12 months because of Ashford Lane. I find, and then 285 is going to be done before, the whole interchange is going to be done. I mean, this town is going to look a lot different in 12 or 24 months from now. I think, those surveys from Perimeter Center on people like, this is a good place to work. They're tired of their damn commutes. They're tired of the orange barrels. They're tired of the freaking exit ramps moving every week, and but I think, when that's all done, they're going to look around and be like, well, maybe this is a pretty great place to, to go to work. And maybe I want to live closer to my office. And maybe some of that demand will kick up for, at Perimeter Center. You may get the first thing that's financeable, may be another high-rise apartment building, or or something, in there, because people want to be there. And we can't, I think we should be acceptive of that. But at the same time, that we recognize also that's not going to solve affordability for anybody unless, I mean, maybe if we're lucky, we get some percentage of affordable units in a project like that. But, you gotta, tackle one thing at a time as best you can. Anyway.
Yeah.
I do think in the interim, just thinking about from a lease space perspective, right, from office lease, if we can put our heads together for the next 24 months on how to help those lessors repurpose space to get money generated there, maybe it's using it as a pop-up shop or a pop-up book fair. Like, I don't know. I think there's lots of options that we could work with them on in order to help kind of ride that wave and bring more people in. and some tax dollars. It's not gonna fully take away from the office space not being used, but it could help in the interim at least.
Couple quick thoughts for people that are experts on this. It looks to me if you give up apartments, because they're older, you want to reuse it and everything, you're going to do cluster housing or whatever. You're trading off density for different housing, aren't you? I mean, apartments will have more density than anything you develop of a single family nature with their clusters or whatever you call them. So you trade those off. Now you may be able to get the same tax dollars out of it because those properties will cost more than the combined taxes on the apartments, but you still have to trade off density to do that. May or may not want to do that. The other thought I had was, I think we ought to define low-income housing. Low-income housing is a great generic term, but when you put it down to dollars and cents and you put that against people, what they earn, your definition of low-income housing may be it's middle-income housing, not really low-income housing. So I think it requires some definition.
And we spent a lot of time talking about what the language around this issue. Obtainable housing is one, workforce housing is another, affordable housing is another, but it isn't so much. And there definitely is a not in my backyard stigma with certain words. This was ARC, so it was meant to be sort of a regional discussion, but what Mayor Paul was on there with me. And so what Dunwoody and Sandy Springs can offer is very different than what like Henry County might be able to offer because of, well, at the time of this discussion, land cost were a major factor. And so I think you have to define the need, what is affordable for someone that works retail 40 hours a week, that kind of thing. What is your goal? What is your objective? And what, quite frankly, is possible. I'm a big proponent, one of many proponents that the solution to the housing crisis in Georgia and beyond is transit. If people can get to jobs in an affordable manner, you have more opportunities to help people actually out of poverty. And so we have the MARTA station. We have opportunities to help with potential managed lane, bus transit, rapid bus transit going east-west. There's lots of opportunities that are down the pike. I don't know when they're coming, but you're right about what redevelopment of apartment complexes looks like. When I became mayor, I'm going to get it wrong, but it was I don't know the language, but it was nearly impossible to redevelop apartment complexes that were pretty full because the value each unit sold for, and we saw it in Dunwoody. We had a project that essentially, much to my chagrin, is pretty slum-like. It's a large apartment complex sold for $150-something thousand a unit to a New York hedge fund. They're not redeveloping it. They're barely taking care of it. And so across the street, the complex. Right. So that's another thing. But, I think the idea of we have a vision, we have a plan, sticking to it, understanding that there are going to be opportunities that our plan didn't necessarily anticipate even a year ago when we adopted Edge City, and trying to roll with it and take advantage of the opportunities that fit our vision, but also knowing we have to wait. I think one of the things that some of us were talking about at dinner a little bit and was apparent in the study that High Street is going to offer is this lack of entertainment opportunities that people feel like. It showed up right before the pandemic in a Discover Dunwoody survey. It was the #1 complaint of visitors. They did a really scientific study. High Street's going to offer it. Ashford the Lawn is offering some. Campus 244 will probably offer some, but the idea that that can change our profile is probably really true. And then, of course, what's happening at the Village, which we didn't even really talk about, which is a big shift in what we would have talked about 4 years ago, frankly. And I think what's happening there, it's baby steps. I always tell people it's a full 1970 shopping center that's basically fully rented, and stayed that way through the recession, which is pretty unusual in Metro Atlanta. And so while lots of people, are screaming to tear it down or whatever, it's a viable commercial property that is just improving with the improvements that, with the help of the Development Authority, and individual business owners. It's making a really big difference, I think, relatively quickly. And so I think there's a lot of positive. I also think we could get condos there because I think we could pre-sell a small building, which is one way to get condos, which is to pre-sell them.
So I'm on a committee that has met exactly one time. It's going to be meeting a lot over the next 6 months, but with Central Atlanta Progress, which is kind of the downtown booster group for downtown Atlanta. And it is all about this thing about converting from office to residential. And so we are working closely with a team of consultants to try to prioritize, to try to identify and prioritize along with the engineering and blah, 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 blah. And essentially where do the numbers work and what are the priority projects that we really ought to be focusing on for truly fiscally feasible in downtown Atlanta. So we're going to learn a lot from that. And again, the conversation's just starting. We've been in the room, players are all there. And so we kicked it off. And I'm encouraged about that because I'm hoping I'll learn some things I can actually share with this group other than we're having meetings. Yeah, that's all I got today, but I'm encouraged. Another thing though that came up here when we were just talking about affordable housing, because in my consulting business, I work with a lot of, amongst other things, affordable housing developers and mixed income developers, is what and where. And I think someone made the point a moment ago in terms of, or a couple people made the points about what is that market, how do we define that? Because of NIMBYism and because of different price points and because of the economic levels of the community, what's palatable? I'm just going to be candid. What's palatable in your neighborhood across the street, around the corner, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times in higher end neighborhoods, it is still palatable to think in terms of, yes, teachers and first responders, because heck, we got those in the building, I hope, I think, and down the street, and we all love them and we know how much we need them. And so I found myself thinking, even when the gentleman was going through the stats about who's here and who works here, I was wondering how that parsed out for the city of Dunwoody and even for the school system here around retention, how easy, how hard, how well we're doing there because of the affordability factor and because of the commute factor. So I don't have the answers to that, but how big an issue is that? Is that an issue for us that we need to be fixing? Because if it is, when we start talking about affordability, I understand there's that service component, and you're right, we have a lot of service workers too, but I'm just thinking about how, if we were to do something with respect to inclusionary zoning, where are we, what are we targeting, what are we trying to solve that we can get traction around and make a real difference here in terms of our community? Okay, that's enough for me for now.
Yeah, this is more a question and out of curiosity because I'm fairly new to the Planning Commission. I don't know if this is something that's been looked at in the past, but on a smaller scale, in terms of housing options and housing affordability, I don't know how well our zoning code allows for things like basement apartments, rooms above garages, those types of smaller scale accessory dwelling units. I think that it could be done in a way where there's enough controls where you don't have character change in the single family neighborhoods. I live in a R100. I wouldn't have an issue with somebody next to me renting out a basement apartment or providing a granny flat in their house if there were enough controls to where it didn't get out of hand, didn't cause impacts to parking and other things like that. I think it's a really good way also to unlock opportunities for homeowners, because say newly empty nester types that have a large amount of space in their 5-4 and a door after their kids move away, they may be getting to a point soon where they can't afford their home anymore, and this provides an opportunity for them to make a little extra income. I think it's something that could be looked at I don't know if you guys have looked at it before, but if it's a way that can preserve the character of a single family neighborhood, but yet provide some of those opportunities for some aging in place and lower income or workforce housing, I think something that we ought to consider.
Yeah, it's 10 till 8. Do you all want to continue or?
I just want to make sure that we did come to some decision around how we frame decision making. So are we saying that as we receive opportunities for new development, to really think about the impact it would have with PCID and the overall tax base? Is that the thing that we need to be thinking of across the board? And as planning is looking at where things go and how things go there, to be thinking about that as well. Okay.
So right now, our code is one thing, but we have this baskets to choose from. I think the development community, they want to see one vision, and that's what they'll go for. So.
We've been focusing on perimeter, obviously, because it's a big, tax base. And I say this periodically, Georgetown is also an area with really good transportation options, with a lot of single-story commercial real estate with big parking lots. And so if something really attractive were to come in there, I think many of the same things we want for perimeter, we could look at in that area too.
I just want to wish Stacy a happy birthday. So.
All right, get the cake.
Good. All right. Thank you all very much.
Is there any public comment? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.